Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1058th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme privilege to be your MC today for a conversation featuring Beverly Semmes and Amanda Gluibizzi. And now I'll introduce Beverly and Amanda. Beverly Semmes shines a light on the paradoxes surrounding the representation of the female body in media and culture. The artist gained early recognition for her coded, large-scale fabric installations based on feminine garments. Her Feminist Responsibility Project furthers the ongoing debate engendered by the shifting politics of female sexuality. Semmes has been honored with many solo exhibitions, including at the Hirshhorn Museum, the ICA Philadelphia, and others. In fall 2023, her alma mater, Tufts University, will present a major solo exhibition. And our host today, former associate professor at Ohio State University, Amanda Gluibizzi, is the founding co-director of the new Foundation for Art History and art scene editor for the Brooklyn Rail. She specializes in mid and late 20th century art, design, and urbanism in the United States, Europe, and Latin America. Amanda is the author of Art and Design in 1960s New York from Anthem Press in 2021. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Amanda to get us started.
Great. Thank you so much, Chloe and Carolyn and Eleanor for doing all of the stuff behind the scenes. Thank you to all of you for being here and participating today. It's lovely to see those of you whom I recognize, so welcome back. And thank you to Beverly for being here today, and congratulations on your wonderful show at Susan England. I am currently wearing pink so as to celebrate Beverly's wonderful installation of 2001, Petunia, which is one of the first works of hers that I was ever introduced to in reproduction, unfortunately for me, not in life. And coincidentally, I had a cat born in 2001, which I also named Petunia. So I feel a kinship here that I hadn't really put together yet. So what we're going to do is start, as always, by looking at the installation of the show. So this is as we walk into Susan England. And Beverly, I wanted you to help us walk through your exhibitions, particularly for people who aren't in New York and won't be able to see it. This seems to be something of a shift for you from some of your earlier installations, because there are not freestanding sculptural elements. We could consider, for example, the two works we're seeing here with clothing as perhaps maybe like a wall-mounted sculpture or relief sculpture, but we don't see freestanding sculpture. And so I wanted you to talk us through a little bit just your thoughts as you installed the show and what you decided you wanted to show.
Sure, sounds good. So hi, everybody. So this show, I titled it Cut and Paste. So it's in my head, it's a combination of two approaches to this body of work. One is these paintings, which come out of collages that come out of pictures from porn and fashion magazines, and we can return to that a little later. And then the other body of work, so the collage element, in cut and paste, and then the sculptures that are made with fabric, I've attached onto the sort of chest area of the dress forms smaller versions of these paintings that have also been flipped a few times, so that I, in a way, cut and pasted those also, like cut the painting off of the kind of white wall where you might see it usually, and pasted it on to a dress. So when you walk in, there's not a lot of works in the show. The paintings are fairly big. They're 50 inches wide and different heights. All the paintings, most of the paintings, I guess I would say, actually, are made from, so I'm taking a magazine page and drawing or painting on top of it. And in the past, when I've made these, I took those drawings or paintings to be scanned and got really high-end scanned and then got them printed onto canvas and then painted again on those. So that for myself, it is always confusing to see because I'm using a tool that's very similar when I make them big, I can't always tell what I've already painted on and what was a print of something I painted on before that isn't so smudgeable or ready to be moved around a little bit. In this case, I added this yet another layer where I was ready to get started on some new works, and I felt like I had a lot of these works on paper where I liked parts of them and not all of them. So I decided at that point to cut them up, and that just kind of led me into this collage process. And I started working with tape and other various kinds of tape. Instead of bothering to kind of glue them and move them around carefully, I started kind of working at the way I had adhered them onto the drawings as another element in these collages. So maybe we could flip to one of the red ones that's very, I think they're the last three. Yeah, that one's good. There, yeah. So here, I had parts I liked, say the face, the upper right corner, and the arm kind of reaching around in the middle on a blue something or other. And then these are also arms kind of embracing in the lower section of the painting. And then you also see my black gaffer's tape that I was using, a super matte cloth tape. And then you also see right over the arm that's in the middle, you see some clear tape that I taped on there. And then I taped the whole thing on top of yet another drawing that I had done on magazine page. So you see the white tape around the edge that ends up forming a kind of mat or frame. And you see in that last one, you see a little tiny bit of the image around the edge at the right and the left side. So you see more magazine, in this case, porn, like little bits of it, kind of, especially maybe the upper right, where you can get a little hint that there's something else even underneath there. The collages end up being kind of thick, they're, because I keep going for a while. And so, yeah, that's my technique. Maybe we go to the one you were just on, the one with the pink tape. Yeah, so here, in this case, I folded the paper under on the bottom right side, and there was another drawing underneath it that had that shoe with the blue stocking kind of thing, and then more gaffer's tape on the left side. And I stuck this sort of square shape, was a piece of fabric that had glitter attached to it, glued on, and I cut it out and made that square. And I hope I'm not too in the weeds just to start with too much. But anyway, yeah, so I got these intent because of the process of getting them scanned and having light go through them, they made this intense shadowing that really fascinated me when I got them, sent back to me.
I was really struck when I was in the gallery at the really high quality of these scans, and I felt myself really wanting to be able to run my hand over the surface of the canvases to see like what was real, like tactily real, I guess I should say, and what was just visually real. And for people who are curious, on my Instagram page, when I promoted this talk, I actually used details of both this image and the previous red image that Beverly just talked about. So you can go to my Instagram and see what those details look like and see how high the scan is. I felt like there were a couple of questions that I had about this. First, what is it about the flatness of them, or the possibility of the flatness of them, that's appealing to you now, given your history of working in 3 dimensions, and even 4 if we count time. So that's part of my question, like, what is it about that, like the suggestion of depth, but the reality of flatness. And then also, I was also thinking about the history of American trompe l'oeil still life, which is something that you have a flavor of at the end of the slideshow. I've included 2 images of trompe l'oeil, one by Pito, who was a late 19th century, early 20th century still life artist, and then Audrey Flack, who is a photorealist artist who often works with still life imagery. And so I was curious about that too. Can we see these as still lives, kind of in this photorealistic or trompe l'oeil tradition?
Well, I saw those images when you shared them with me a little earlier, and I thought that was perfect and not something I would have really thought about. The early American and the painting. That guy was only 20 years old, or died when he was only 20 years old, right? Or was that it, or did he paint it for 20 years?
He painted it for 20 years. Yeah.
Oh my God, he painted it for 20 years. Okay, so this the kind of feat of it, and the way it how they have this kind of like show off isn't the real word I want, but they have this way that they're like this guy's got so much control that he's enjoying the possibility of weaving your eye around and playing with the realism. And I mean, I don't, the skill isn't really the same thing, but I'm fascinated by what digital imagery can do right now and how incredibly sharp, you can get something to be. And that, we see it in our lives too. We see, giant billboards that might be from pictures that aren't that high res in the beginning. And yeah, I know I entered this more trompe l'oeil territory, especially with this newer body of work, and I'm not exactly sure what part of it. I like the idea that it almost feels real, and that that the characters in them feel like real people.
Mm-hmm.
I talked, we had a little moment in the press release where I quoted something. I've become friends over the last like 15 years or so with a woman who was in magazines these are all from very dated magazines from the early 1990s, or the whole 1990 period. And so I happened to meet someone at a party years ago who turned out to have been in those magazines during those years, that were also the years that I had this stack of Penthouse magazines that I had somehow adopted. And so this person who became my friend, I did purposefully a picture where I found her and worked with her image as the start for one of these works on paper. And I found that and then when it blew up into a painting, I felt this connection to that that painting that I didn't have when the models were more anonymous to me. I felt more intensely kind of protective as I was covering bits up, and I felt that this person wasn't just a person. They were, just a sort of, nameless magazine model, but they were real. So for this show, I purposefully found used parts, since I was using bits of my friend Nikki, who is in the last picture there. That's her on the upper right. And in a sort of, I guess it sounds a little creepy too, but in kind of Frankenstein-y way. So there's little bits of Nikki and from different photo shoots around the show. And it was also kind of my attempt to kind of bring the work a little closer to me. And and my own body or thinking about bodies. And I felt like I treated the paintings a little differently with Nikki in them. So
I mean,
yeah.
that makes a lot of sense to me. I don't know her, so for me, she remains anonymous. I think also interestingly, the way that the photo reproduction works, the print images that are being reproduced very much look then like print images, because of course, you know, porn magazines aren't printed on the highest stock and stuff like that. So they actually do start to kind of dissolve into their pixels. And so that's kind of an interesting thing to me as a person who remains a stranger to these women. To me, they still read as quite distant and anonymous, whereas to you, the artist who has now become friends with her, she reads as actually making more of a connection to you.
Yeah, it's funny that, well, also the magazines that I have, these penthouse stack of magazines from those years, you see in the magazines this transformation from at one point, like Playboy, they had like much higher production values. They were making money at a certain point, you know, I guess 70s and 80s style. And then, you know, online porn, different, like the magazines were like the magazine industry started hurting, and you see them using cheaper paper, and the photography isn't of the same quality. So but yeah, they're a little far away. That's interesting to me too. They're not so intensely present. There's a little bit of a gap. But back to the question of, you know, I mean, when I'm making the clothes are very real, like they're almost something, oftentimes they're sewed a little bit sewn up at the neck or whatever, but they are more than just suggesting a dress. You know, they could be a dress. They're real in that way. And when I make a pot is a pot, like they could hold water, hopefully. And then maybe, so with the painting, somehow that they were real things was a kind of, might be the answer to the question like 5 minutes ago about the realness of them and what attracted me to wanting them to be flat. I guess if they're going to be paintings, they're going to be flat. I found some paint that I've been using that I'm using, like slowly layering it, and that process also, you know, with some testing, I found paint that comes as close to looking like the way that the kind of pigment that they use to print these also. So that's part of my own confusion when I'm working on them. This is Nikki too. This is this is kind of part of my discovery of my connection with Nikki. This image is one that I've used before I used this image in my previous show at Susan Inglet 2 years ago. And that was when I really noticed that I felt differently about the Nikki image than other images. And this one is not a collage, but it was the beginning of the idea of playing with this. I called it Rorschaching, turning, making Rorschach into a verb, you know, flipping and playing around with all the other things you can do digitally easily. Doubling.
I was interested in this one. This is called Four Hands, and we're looking at flipped images here. But then the piece that's called Flip does not have flipped images, at least not that I was immediately noticing. And so I was kind of curious just about your titling here. Are you playing with us? Are you sending us back and forth between the images and hoping that we start to notice the way that the images are speaking across to each other?
Well, the two orange dresses aren't flipped, but the painting is you know, would have been a horizontal, and the image on the painting is flipped. So
okay, so it's flipped
kind of,
it's flipped horizontally.
yeah, it's flipped.
Okay,
Well, it's
all right.
the image is like that's a more even classic Rorschach, right? Because it's if you press them together and open them up, So there's these two red pots and, the legs coming from different figures.
Mhm.
And then it's flipped like on its side. Yeah.
Okay.
There was a lot of just like, I guess I was trying to give these kind of for this one, like this activated word that
Mhm.
also flipping it, like the idea of safety orange. And then I don't know, why like a warning or something, like using a fabric that is kind of flipped from its usual usage.
Mhm.
Safety
Chloe,
orange.
could you go to the image right before it so we can see the entire? Thank you so much. So this is what Beverly is talking about. It's interesting to me too that we're playing not just with flipping and with the idea of the Rorschach, but also the flipping of textures too. So going from something as fine and sheer as chiffon to something as thick and really haptic as faux fur. And so I guess we could kind of see a certain amount of tactile flipping going on there as well. But of course, for us, the viewer, we have to just kind of work with this in our imaginations. And so here too, I thought there was a really interesting way that you're dealing with the pornographic images where we, of course, are projecting ourselves into this moment, perhaps with, again, a haptic quality to them, but something that we can't actually enter. And positioning those onto these backdrops of these dresses that also have this feel to them that we would want to like run our hands over, and yet we're not permitted to.
There's a sensuous element to both the dresses and to hopefully the paintings. Yeah. Yeah. And a tactility that you kind of feel the touch. That's nice.
Just looking at this one, pausing here for a minute. So you have a few different works in the show that have fabric backdrops, for lack of a better word. I recognize that they're also fully elements of themselves. So we have Flip, we have the red robe, and then we have Flag. Flip is the only one that the dresses fall to the ground and kind of spill and billow out onto the floor. And so they're interesting in that they break that dimension, the picture plane dimension. So they're not just hanging flat on the wall, they actually come out towards us. And so I'm curious about that too. How do you make those decisions about what remains totally something that we just approach vertically versus something where we actually do have to involve our bodies more in order to understand it and to start to approach it?
Going into this, when I had the paintings going on these dress forms was a later development in my studio. The big paintings came first, and then these later. And I felt like I wanted at least one piece to have this kind of grounding feeling and be existent on the floor like that. There's always a kind of landscape reference for me with these dress pieces that are. This one suggests something bigger. It's not. It could be bigger, and it was bigger in the studio for a while with more pooling. But I felt it had a little the funny faux fur on the top has this tree bark look to it, and I was thinking sort of tree roots, something like that. I wanted one in each room. I didn't have. I had this idea. So the one that's over the desk, the smaller red one, is sort of in that space of the gallery when you walk in, and then this is in the main room, and then the red robe in the back. So that there was only one kind of activating the space in each room.
The red robe one is funny to me because when I think about the term, the red robe, in terms of art history, I have to think about Sargent's painting of the doctor wearing the red robe. And of course, I'm thinking about the sensuality of him, the way that he rubs the velvet of the red robe between his fingers, the knowledge that he was a gynecologist, which is kind of fascinating too. And of course, then this masculine figure of perhaps ambiguous sexuality, then taken into this space where the red robe is hanging, and then we have this blue female element over it. And so I was curious about this too. How much are you engaging with those ways that we might automatically have art historical references in our mind? Are you thinking about that, or are you just moving towards something that feels formally right to you?
So I had this, the process for that one, I mean, not necessarily thinking about art history, although I love the references. I had this red, which just to see it in other light or whatever is a little piece of that in the studio for a while, several years. And I had been thinking of, just kept moving it around and not doing anything with it, but I had a few yards of it. And then I had this idea of making it into a bathrobe, which would have a little bit of, I guess, bedroom feeling to it, as opposed to the other piece, which is, more of a dress you'd wear into the world, or at the right size and everything. And then, so it's actually a very large, it's pretty large as a pattern for the bathrobe. It's big, as it comes down past the floor when I put it on, well past the floor. And then when I wanted to pin it on the wall, I went with it's so it's actually being pinned to the back of this robe, so that the bathrobe is as though it were hanging on a couple of hooks. And this would be the back of it, where that you might have tied the you see the belt of it kind of tied around the back. And I don't know. It's not, they're not things I ever think about that much in advance. I kind of had that little painting around and then I popped it on there. I thought about the blue and the really deep velvet color would be good.
It's interesting. I'm sorry, please go ahead.
This one, like the other one, has this doubled image feeling. So even though I painted blue on the bottom half, if you could see the image underneath, it's also Rorschached again. So, there'd be some blonde hair at the bottom, there'd be another eyeball. And then that part was covered. So it had a different feeling than the one, say, on the chest of the orange ones.
It's interesting how the way that this renders in a two-dimensional image really differs from the way it feels when we approach it in life. Again, approaching it in life, you're very, very aware of the velvet and the drape, the way that Beverly's hung it. It kind of like ripples a little bit. And then, of course, the painting itself has its own materiality. Here, it almost seems like we have basically like a window, a blue window into the robe itself. And so I was curious about that too. Are you thinking about this push and pull, especially since you're using reproductive technology on your canvases? Are you thinking then about how that fourth or fifth or sixth iteration of reproduction is going to read, or is it always about the object in the space as we approach it?
I like the way this one makes it. In the picture here, you see this very strong silhouette. You feel very aware of the cutoutness of that red shape being more organic, than the rectangle of the blue. Exactly why I even started to stick the little paintings on the clothes, I'm really not sure. It was such a, I've made the dresses for a while and had sort of walked away from doing them so much anymore. And this has been this other ongoing body of work with Magazine Page that's gone on at this point for its own lifespan of like 20 years. So there, would be separate bodies of work. And it felt like breaking a rule or something to stick to mash them up, like they were doing two different things. And So I felt like, you know, yeah, like I had done something kind of wrong, and that that was good. That's it. That's like a good idea.
Kind of like the
And then,
Ghostbusters crossing the streams.
yeah, yeah.
Like it opens a portal into a new world.
There you go. Yeah, yeah. So, but there,
I
I mean,
think,
all the paintings are always like windows, like you said. I think about, I mean, painting has that quality, right? And
yeah,
then
of course.
these really rich fabrics I'm using with these very particular colors have this like in the world physicality to them. And I thought that you respond when I got used to seeing them together. I thought, well, there's just like two different responses, that the painting part that you're looking at is a little more in your head, I think, and the fabric part underneath them is a little more of a physical response, like the way you approach, I think, a lot of sculpture.
Mhm. I think too, if we weren't very familiar with your oeuvre, we could read especially this one perhaps as being somewhat theatrical too. Perhaps as though, you know, this blue window that's opening into the robe, but also kind of opening out of the robe could be hanging on, for example, theater curtains or something like that. And so there is a way too where you're kind of opening the proscenium for us, right? And revealing something, which of course then works counter to the robe itself, because we're looking at the back of the robe, right? So we wouldn't be able to open the robe that way. It would have to be flipped around. And so it's this really wonderful way that it's working with tactility and flatness and the history of painting and arguments about theatricality. And so it's this really, really wonderfully replete work.
That's great. This one in particular, to me, had a kind of mournful aspect to it. You know, that this feeling that there was that that it just had I don't know, it's not a, it had a little more to do with sort of a shroud, or has a I thought about you know, pictures that we've been seeing on all sides of war of people, you know, as people holding up their pictures of people who were dead. And you know, I thought that really dark, intense red had something a little less pop and a little more like in that territory, which I can't even totally put my finger on.
That's really, really interesting.
Hmm.
And this is why we need to hear from the artists, right? Because that's something that I maybe wouldn't have noticed yet, just working my way through the gallery. When you think about shapes and your work, I'm curious about this too. The paintings all pretty much are rectilinear, but then the fabrics, the ceramic works, the glass works, all then take on these other much more wildly organic shapes. And so I'm curious about this too, about how shape is working in your work, and again, this kind of like push and pull between an identifiable geometry and something that winds up being kind of more difficult to control.
Well, you know, maybe that was also part of the impetus of putting the canvas originally on the dress forms, was to, you know, open up and, you know, leave the rectangle as the defining part of it too. This one is, you know, has this one place for a sleeve cut out, but not on the other side. A bodice, you know, the top of the kind of dress forms that I'm working with, and you know, no neck hole. The painting itself was from that really early, maybe it was the first one we looked at, the red one, which had Nikki in the upper right, and in the middle you see the arm that's wrapping around that was on a little bit of blue. I had it scotch taped on, and here I just took that little bit of it, just the arms, and I was interested how when I reproduced it, it ended up looking like eyes in this point, like they were that there was this mask feeling of it, and then a little bit of that same if you remember when I pointed out that you saw a little bit of the blue that was behind the piece, that's the little bit of blue on the very right edges, you know, that's on one edge and then repeated. It opened up new territory for me getting them. It's like printmaking or something, like you send something out and it comes back to you and you are seeing it fresh, and it's and it's got this charge to it. Like, or actually like collaborating with somebody, you know, when you get surprised by what they're going to do.
Hopefully delightfully surprised and not
Right.
like, oh.
Right. No, sometimes they are disappointing when they come back too, but they're big, so.
It's funny that you talk about these two ovals as kind of like eyes, because there are eyes throughout the show, some of which are singled out or that you've emphasized in the work, for example, like this eye on blue. And of course, it's not just a single eye, right? The large eye that we can see here almost works as almost like a mask, or the lower half of the figure's face. But then, of course, we have her two eyes right above. This is something that we could think about in terms of the pornographic image, right? How does the person, the object of desire engage with us? Does she look out at us directly and try to make eye contact, or is she looking to the side? And so we would, you know, of course, if we were thinking about like the male gaze, we might read this as like a coy look or a suggestive look. But I was also curious about the way that these eyes then engage with the other paintings throughout the installation of the show. So they're not just necessarily looking out at us, the viewer, but they're also looking at each other, and they're communicating across the room at each other. This is something then that I was thinking about, especially because when you were talking with me and Carolyn about putting the slideshow together, you were also talking about color relationships across the show, that you felt that there were paintings that almost worked as pendants to each other because they had similar color relationships. And so I'm interested in this too, about this relationship, first of the eyes here, but also like, what are the eyes seeing? And are the eyes actually looking at the works themselves? So are they self-regarding in addition to looking out at us?
That's nice. Well, you know, I paired this one with the blue with the red robe in the back room, and it's the same, you know, basic collage that's in this big one. This is, you know, what is it, 73 by 56, so quite big. And then the mini version on the chest. I like the relationship between the two of them, but I like the idea of the figures looking at each other. You know, one of the things about working with, so here's Nikki again. Maybe I also feel like, and I know Nikki's like a good sport. Like I know if I stuck a half an eyeball on Nikki's face and that she would just like laugh or something. And that I could, I don't know, well, the other people are really going to get mad, but Nikki often knew the other models that are in the pictures, and she could, you know, she'd come to the studio and she'd go, wow, I wonder what Julie's doing these days. Or, you know, I lost touch with what's her name, or she has the ability to, I mean, she has this inventory of the poses in her head. So she would say, you know, when you don't know what to do and the photographer's looking at you, you have these go-tos. So, you know, you hold your leg, look down, and, you know, look over your hip. Or you know, this one would be like a very particular, say, look in your eyes that, you know, is what they're looking for. And it's, she called it her toolbox, like a picture of images that she knows she's creating. And yeah, this kind of blew me away that she was thinking about what was being created, at least as much as the photographer. And I guess sometimes you'd have a photographer who had a lot of ideas and knew what they were doing, but others that maybe didn't have ideas. So yeah, I guess it's interesting that you said looking at each other, because yeah, that's how I think more about the Nikki part of it and the stories of who they might be.
I'm sorry, please go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
Okay. This is interesting to me too, because I think that since you've begun working with the pornographic images, we've had a certain shift in the way that we talk about pornography and the reclamation of sex work for the people who participate in it, and in this instance, particularly women. And so I was very curious about this. Do you feel that there is a corresponding shift in the way that people are responding to your work? Especially if you think about, the paintings where you've covered up, for example, the genitalia of the women that you're reproducing. Do you feel that the conversation has also evolved over the course of your career?
Yeah, there's no question that it's evolving. And it's interesting to watch it evolve. Kind of early on, I also said, I also had to kind of repeat to myself that it's a personal project. It is, I mean, it might have this censorship aspect to it, but it was also very much like this gesture that I felt like making when I end up with this pile of magazines. I'm sort of not looking at them for a long time. I finally decide to I keep them, but I don't know what to do with them, this neighbor's magazine. And I started thinking about what it would be like to cover them up, kind of doing what I felt like doing. And of course, as you kind of show it and see it in the world, you start to wonder how that might feel to other people and why you might want to cover something up or leave something behind. I always wondered if there's always the suggestion that you might get to something more sexy by having it partially covered, that they were also had a reclamation of sexiness too.
Mhm.
And I've also always liked thinking about my own feelings about it when I feel somehow irritated when I really look at these, even old magazines that seem kind of far away, that there's this way that they sort of get me agitated or something. And also that they might, that there's a lot of complicated feelings that I have. And one of the reasons I started with it is because um, I liked all the juggling of these complicated feelings, like I was trying to kind of tap them down or something.
Mhm.
It's harder for me to think about what the bigger culture is thinking about pornography because I'm so deep into my own stuff here in my little relationship with them. But I see that my relationship shifts over time too. And that it was interesting to me to think more about like what it meant to cover somebody up and how they might feel about being covered.
Mhm. I guess for an artist whose part of whose practice is to make clothing or
Mhm.
to make sculptures that resemble clothing, then it makes sense that part of your impulse would be to cover the body,
Mhm.
because
Mhm.
of course that's partly what clothing does, right? It covers us, it protects us, and then also, of course, we can strategically reveal parts of our body, just as you're saying, to be perhaps even more alluring for that cover.
Yeah, they're definitely both, the fabric pieces and these magazine page pieces are cover-ups, are all about the cover-up, the sort of yeah, what's shown, what isn't shown. Mhm.
I want to pause on this one, and then I think we'll move to the work that you're going to be showing at the Botanical Garden.
Sure.
I was interested in this one, okay, because first of all, we have this amazing boot, which is crazy, but also that the suggestion of the paint handling seemed um, to pick up on the I don't know what to call it, the ruching or the squishing of the boot. The
Huh.
paint handling itself seemed
Hmm.
almost to echo the way that the boot was actually caressing and covering the leg. And so I was curious about that too. Just when you're making these and when you're thinking about the paint application and when you're developing the collage and then moving further with it, are you also working that granularly where you're actually looking at the way that these elements might be fitted over the body and then kind of picking that up almost as, for example, like a brush stroke?
Well, I like that idea that it's like something like that suede and something like the crunching of it. The yellow in particular, that area where you really
Yes.
see you see the mark making.
Mhm.
In this case, I was more thinking about, I mean, I let that red part get heavier, but then, and I painted that. And then I was trying to not cover this one as much. The couple that the other two very red ones had a lot more cover up in them. And I thought that it would be interesting to try to hold myself back from the mad cover up that I would tend to do.
Mhm.
And if they're ever overpainted, they're overcovered. And yeah, leave a little bit of, boob there or whatever. And the I like the rug or whatever that is, the kind of fake bearskin rug on that she's leaning on.
Mhm.
And yeah, there's a kind of old fashionedness. A lot of the magazines have these um, indicators of luxury, I guess you'd say, like that, you too can have a bearskin rug, or you can have a fancy car, or there'll be like the ads in the magazines will be like high-end liquor ads, and then the the feeling is this fancy girl could be yours or something. Aspirational, as Nikki would call it. Yeah.
Mhm. Do you see yourself working with Nikki beyond let's call it historical photographs of her? Do you see her as perhaps being a collaborator in the as a live human being as opposed to as a reproduction?
When I have thought about collaborating with Nikki, it's more about writing. I've thought about doing some kind of writing with her or something. It's yeah, we've had so many intense conversations around sort of the early moments of her, what was going on with her head, in her head during these years, and the way I would have been thinking about them when I was the age she was. And I don't know if anything would ever come to that, but I would think about it actually using language if that was going to be
Mhm.
the case.
Oh, I like that idea a
Um,
lot, actually.
mm, mm,
Yeah. Okay, do that. Yeah.
mm. Okay. That's all we need.
um,
Mm,
so let's move to the New York Botanical Garden
yeah.
work, because we're approaching an hour. I'm surprised to say.
I was going to look, yeah.
So the show at Susan England is up now, but Beverly will also have work included in an exhibition at the New York Botanical Garden, which is opening, I believe, in the fall. Is that correct?
Oh, no, it's opening in 2 weeks.
Oh, in 2 weeks. I'm
Yeah,
sorry. I
yeah.
didn't
It's
realize it was
there.
so soon.
Yeah.
Okay. And so Beverly's given us some still images and then also this little like teaser of the video that will be included. So Chloe's going to show it.
That's a teaser for sure. So we already installed, like this was the install day, like
Okay.
2 weeks ago or something, because they have different people coming on different days. And so that was sort of like early moments of trying to figure out how big the screen should be in the room. But there's a nice parallel. It's the earliest work that I've kind of consider artwork of mine, post school. And then of course the most recent work showing at Susan's. And so that's a nice thing. So this is going back to 88. It has the date of 2024 because I went back to the original slides and reprinted them digitally because all the copies I had of the pictures from 1988 or right around then were not looking quite as fresh anymore. And we thought we'd be well off to print them digitally and see how they came out. And they look, I mean, it's amazing what digital photography can do. So there's 4 of these pictures. It was something I made. I made this coat. It's made of window screening and pink feathers that are stuck into it. So I made an actual kind of oversized coat and then stuck feathers one by one into it, into the screening. The way that directionality of the feathers went, they kind of poked in easily enough, but didn't pull out so easily. So they stuck. And then I had a friend come with me to this garden that was located at the time in the grounds of a psychiatric hospital upstate. I made this hat out of fake Christmas trees that were spray painted black. And I had a few hats, a few funny different shapes. And then I photographed my friend walking around these hedges in these kind of repetitive motions, and then just like around as still photographs also. And the curator, Jennifer Gross, it's a group show that's at the New York Botanical Garden. And she'd remembered seeing these pieces from the early 90s and contacted me about having these in particular. The landscape looks a lot like various places in the New York Botanical Garden, these very sculptural, these wilder areas, and then these much more sculpted, maintained areas. And so the video is the figure walking around this hedge very slowly, and you hear bird sounds. So my whole soundtrack kind of permeates the room where I am, with hoping the other artists won't mind too much. But I'm in a kind of section of it. And the show itself is organized around the theme of the anniversary of the publishing of Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland series, Through the Looking Glass, as a kind of thematic place to begin. And Jennifer Gross was the curator of the visual art part. It's a real, well, they've been doing interesting shows at the New York Botanical Garden, visual shows for a while. They did a Kusama show pre-COVID. I missed that, but I hear it was, I mean, I'm sure it was amazing. Then Ebony Patterson last year, which was great.
Yes,
And
we interviewed her last year.
you
about
did?
that
Oh
show.
yeah.
Yeah.
That was just such a great show. And she just was in so many locations and doing all these, it was just fabulous. And well, so there's yeah, there's a number of artists, like 10, like including Yoko Ono has this marble chess piece, big marble chess piece, chess setup that's out in a kind of unexpected location. So pieces are scattered around the grounds. It's huge. It's 250 acres. And then in this other site are more traditional gallery spaces where I am, and I don't know, Abe Morrell, Allison Schatz has a amazing looking piece outside. There's a piece there are these giant mushrooms that are, I don't know, 35 feet or something like that. I don't know if they're inflated. I've only seen pictures of them, that were meant to originally go in Burning Man, and somehow never happened at Burning Man because of mud or something else. So they're here in the unlikeliness. Yeah, it's a real collaboration between more like horticulture, I mean, the horticulture study area at the Botanical Garden is like very at the top of their field kind of thing. And so this is a real collaboration. So there's a woven into the art is also horticultural parts of the exhibit that kind of pertain to like Victorian England. So for a while, I was going to be next to an exhibit of mushrooms, the kind of mushrooms that were taken, hallucinogenic mushrooms that were taken at the time of Lewis Carroll. And then maybe it seemed a little too much like this is what happens when you take too many mushrooms. So they put me in the more traditional gallery. But yeah, so it's called Curious Nature.
How do you feel being related to Alice in Wonderland in this way?
You know, yeah, I mean, it's great to be in these locations like this that are so iconic and New Yorky. And it was actually a place I had never been before. Jennifer Gross is a really good curator and has dealt with the complexities of this. You know, she's thinking it through, and it's dealt with in various ways and not in a simple way. It's nice. You don't want to be a kind of illustration of some idea, but at the same time, you know, the New York Botanical Garden is very much trying to get a general audience, and you can see it. You can see it on their website there, and they sell tickets. It's something that, you know, the tickets are like $36. You know, it's more like if you were from out of town and you went to the Met or something. So they have a lot of kid programs and other things. So it's a different kind of show to be in, you know. But I like the way that they're almost like a show within a show. This, you know, Jennifer keeping her, she usually does things in like university galleries. It's all very intellectually rigorous. And there we are kind of in this other context of giant mushrooms and things. Yeah.
Well, the pink coat will marry well with the azaleas, which are just starting to bloom. I was just there again, so I know about this, and the peonies coming out, right? So Cornelia will be perfect.
There you go, with her people, or her plans. Yeah, yeah. When they take you like on a tour, they put me in a little golf cart and rode me around, and they're like, "This is Tulip Hill. They're all about to happen," and you know, yeah, the whole moments of nature and how it's constantly shifting. So good.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to leave it there so that we can turn it over to our participants who may have questions for you. But Beverly, thank you so much for being so generous with your time. And again, congratulations on these 2 shows.
Oh, thank you. Thanks, Amanda, for those good questions.
Thank you so much, Beverly and Amanda. That was such a treat to listen to. Thank you so much. And it was really lovely to hear you speak more about the show, Beverly, and your insights throughout were so brilliant, Amanda. We have a question from GE, and so I'm going to pass it over to GE to ask. And if anyone else has a question, please post it in the chat and I will go to you next. But first, GE, you're on.
Thank you so much, Chloe. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, Beverly. Are these works, talking about the collage works earlier, are these works a read as a representation of the ways the human mind may operate, rather than as a sort of representation of image and the reproaches or recessions, or even as projections of a kind of narrator's mental processing?
Yes. I mean, all those things, I hope, I guess. Yeah. No one way to read them, but definitely I hope that they bring up the complexities of this kind of representation, particularly of, yeah, the female body and all the sort of issues involved.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your question.
Thanks, GE. I'll ask a sort of gimme question, but I'm genuinely very curious how you answer this. I'm curious how you know a work is finished. You know, when you're working in collage and especially covering as an act of artistic process, like how do you know that you've reached the right composition and that you're comfortable with the image that you're looking at?
I mean, I just find that so hard still, always. Yeah, it's just so hard to know. I try to kind of hold myself back to, you know, it's almost like the most dangerous moments are the moments when I'm most like excited. Like if I go like, wow, I'm really onto something, that's probably when I'm killing it, you know? Like if I'm having sort of too much fun and don't want to stop working or something. But yeah, it's been, and particularly these more than the dress pieces that had a different kind of arc, but these, it's really a hard balance for me to figure out when they're kept alive or something, how to keep them sort of up in the air at this point of, and not overwork them. It's been really tough. Yeah. And there's over there. Yeah. There's a whole, yeah, there's a bunch of them over there in the back. Yeah. that went a little too far.
I love it.
Editing, right?
Thank you so much. No, I that was a beautiful answer. I I think those are all of our audience questions for today. So I'm going to pass it over to you to tell us about things you might have read to conclude this program.
Okay, then. Good. I made a list. So as I mentioned earlier to you, I couldn't think of anything when you asked yesterday if I had anything I wanted to read, and I kept thinking about it last night. Couldn't think of anything, and then like 1 a.m, I started thinking about stuff. So I thought, okay, so I will. The obvious thing to do, that show at the New York Botanical Garden. I should read a little bit of Through the Looking Glass and like have that happen now. And so Lewis Carroll, and then I'm like, I don't know, 1:15. I'm like, no, a little sweet, a little, I don't know, we've been there. And this older guy writing for this 10-year-old girl. I'm not reading that, I'm not reading that. And so then next I swung the other direction and I thought I'll pull out, some of these old Penthouse magazines. And they're the old school Penthouse magazines had a section called Letters to the Editor that were little snippets of, you won't believe what happened to me, somebody writing like this, and then telling little sexy vignettes or something. And they were so clearly fake. And they were always the same in every single one, like with the exact same voice and like, how about this or something, like little fantasy moments. And I thought I'd read that. And then, I don't know, 1:30 a.m. scratch that. So then I thought, I'd read, I was going to read some bell hooks, which I didn't even know where my bell hooks was, but I thought, don't do this to poor bell hooks. Try to save me after I've tried to read Alice in Wonderland and pornography at the same time. So I moved on from bell hooks. So then this morning, so Catherine Liu, who is a friend and also who is now a professor at in the film department at University of California at Irvine. And previous to that, in her previous life, she was a curator in New York, and she curated an early work in an early show for me in the 1990s, a group show called Plastic Fantastic Lover, which was an amazing show, very very high color, very physical. A lot of people whose names you know now. So Catherine isn't doing art stuff so much anymore, but she wrote this amazing article for Business Insider a year ago about the university system. She's thinking much more politically, but she talked at that point about the kind of university industrial complex and anyway, I'm going to leave it I'm not going to spell it out too much, but Catherine has a Substack, and then this was like Business Insider 2023. I'm not sure exactly. Catherine lectures a lot at universities, and I just thought of her this morning with like looking at the newspaper and everything going on at UCLA, et cetera, with universities and how they're dealing with the crackdowns. And then I popped over to, so Catherine Liu has a son, he's 23, and he's been teaching in China for the last couple of years, and he has a Substack also, and it's great about him and like day-to-day living in China. So I thought I'd plug Leo's Next Generation and leave it there. So my list is like, read it yourself, I guess you could say. Yeah. Check it out if you want, kind of thing.
Thank you so much, Beverly. That was lovely. And thank you again to you and Amanda for this conversation today. And thank you to the team at Susan Inglet Gallery, who were so helpful in providing images and in supporting in preparation for today's event. We'd also like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art, who sponsor our NSE program and make weekday conversations like this one possible. They also support our growing archive, where you'll be able to watch this conversation shortly on YouTube. The Rail has been free and independent for 23 years. A donation directly supports our staff, our operations, and our writers. You can support our work through the link in the chat. And if you're free tomorrow at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation on the work of the incredible Art 21, hosted by Eleanor Hartney. And as is Rail tradition, you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for being with us today in this space, and I hope we see you again soon.
Thank you so much, Beverly. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you
Really
much,
so
Beverly.
much.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Really enjoy your work, Beverly. Thank you.
So much.
Thank you. So
Bye.
nice.
Thank you. Take care, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.